Welcome to season 9 of the Inglorious Pastords with Bruce Martin and what's his name?
Don't test me. I know who I am.
Tell our listeners.
Roger Martin, your brother.
Yep.
I know. We're
how
related.
Many fingers am I holding up?
I see 2 fingers.
That's good.
Well, your thumb was slightly up as well, but.
So, welcome back, dear listeners and viewers. This is
you are so valuable to us.
This is a monumental sort of day. I'm going to try to center us a little more there. Monumental day.
Oh no.
Monumental day because
oh my gosh.
I never really wanted Aaron Rodgers at the Broncos anyway. That was actually just a ploy to create a lot of fervor out there in the NFL world.
And to distract others thinking the Broncos were going all in on Aaron.
Well, they did hire like 17 of his coaches, so there's that.
Which Russell's going to have to get used
to. But I did say on one of our podcasts that Russell Wilson, I thought, would be a better fit for the team, for the organization.
Right. Is there a team left? I think they traded most of the team
to get it. They traded the future team. And they traded the quarterback that wasn't working out. Okay. We didn't lose any of the major players. Nice guy. And perhaps he can throw the ball in Seattle better. Which sometimes, a quarterback does make a huge shift, gets into a different system. It works. But Russell Wilson, baby. So my favorite tweet from the morning news was, and the Denver Broncos are relevant again. My second favorite tweet was, the AFC West just got a heck of a lot harder.
Well, I saw like the Super Bowl odds went like from 25-1 to 12-1 or something.
Well, we're like in the top 5 teams to get there now.
Right.
And it's like, okay, we've got a team. We won't have a team in 3 years.
Right. Exactly. But literally there may not be.
But we got our quarterback now. So that's good. That's exciting news. So
he's going to have to carry you through.
Well, here's the thing. Our defense can keep any team under 23 points. So if Russell can just help us score 24, that's really the number.
Right.
That's all we need is 24.
The sobering thing always is when you put all this investment into one player who could get injured.
Oh, you did not say that.
I'm simply saying, no. Well, I'm saying it's.
Why don't we just say he threw the most notorious Super Bowl interception in history? Why don't we just share that?
That's a fun memory.
That is a fun memory. Not for Seahawks fans.
I enjoyed that interception.
But I'm going to say that's not on Russell Wilson. That was on the play caller. You're on the 1 yard to win the Super Bowl. And
it was also on the.
Well, Malcolm Butler just did what he did was just ridiculous. Just reading it.
Well, the fun part of that,
unbelievable.
Without staying too long, is
we can stay here as long as we want. It's our podcast.
The Patriots had practiced that play.
Isn't that wild?
So in the days leading up to it, and the day before the game, they had practiced that, and Malcolm did not make the cut fast enough.
Okay,
they did not. And so they had to coach him up. Here's what you've got to do. Browner's going to jam that other receiver because here's where they want to do this little cross.
Yep.
He's got to jam, but you have got to jump it.
Yeah.
You have got to.
Crazy.
So they had literally looking through the plays that
practiced that scenario.
When that came up and that configuration, they knew that could happen. And you just see this moment, even right before the play, Browner goes back and says a little word to Malcolm. So coaching was a huge piece. Okay, you've got Carroll's decision, but you also have the coaching on the other side.
Oh yeah,
how so there's the fascinating backstory of that particular. But all that said, I still can see the quarterback's face after throwing that Russell, and he I felt terrible for him, but of course I was ecstatic.
Well, yeah, being a big
Patriots
fan as you are. So you had an interesting weekend.
Did I?
So let me just tell our listeners, and then Roger can explain, and then I'll tell you everything that he can't remember. But Roger had a thing called transient global amnesia. Look it up. It's a thing.
Well, hold on. Now this is Bruce's diagnosis.
Okay.
They didn't
I'm no doctor.
Well,
okay?
I mean, yes.
They're not, because it's a thing that they can't really diagnose.
Right. So there's an amnesia event that occurred in Roger's life Sunday, 4 days ago.
But they scanned your brain. They
all the kinds of
arteries,
things, right? So not a stroke, not a TIA, not artery. They checked all kinds of things. They checked a lot of things.
A lot of checking. Do you still have the little things on your chest?
No, I pulled those off. I still have some bruising here from the IV. The IV.
Yeah,
but
that's fun.
Yeah.
Well, we're just glad to have you back, because for about 10 hours on Sunday, there was no Roger. I mean, like, I've never seen anything like it, and it scared the heck out of me. It really did. I was
scared a lot.
I'm like, wow.
I wasn't scared because I really wasn't aware.
No, but it was interesting. The cognition that you had. This is what's so interesting about it.
It's fascinating.
If you lose your short-term memory, like globally, so you can't remember the thing that happened 5 seconds ago because your mind's not recording. So we came in and Roger's like, oh, long-term memory's in place. Bruce and Marlena. I said, hey, Roger, how do you feel? He goes, I don't know, but you're kind of scaring me, which is fascinating because it's like he didn't know that anything was wrong, but in the present, he could tell, looking at our faces, they seem alarmed.
Well, fascinating that you have, so to learn this.
And he doesn't remember any of that, by the way.
Between cognition, so ability to respond even to questions.
Right, to drive a vehicle.
So there are different kinds of things. I get back from the hospital late Monday afternoon, and I see that someone has weeded my garden bed.
And you were surprised.
And it turned out, well, I had actually weeded my garden bed Sunday afternoon. So, and it looked very nice. So I looked at, this cognition, the ability, I had gone out to a movie that morning with my buddy Fred, and this is when the fog had started, and I didn't realize. I had like between 1 and 11 is like total memory loss. I don't have any recollection, but then it's like foggy, dreamlike. So I recall going to this movie. Fred, I remember a couple elements of the movie. I don't remember how the movie ended.
Yep.
And then I'm told that Fred and I actually had a conversation, maybe 30 minutes or so afterward. So I'm able to carry on this conversation. So I have cognition and even enough memory there because if you have zero short-term memory,
you can't even respond to a question.
Right. And you can't carry on a conversation because you're just saying the same things. And tragically, that can happen for people. I've read about that. But so I have a conversation, I drive home, I stop by Circle K, get a soda. I do a number of things that, again, I have no recollection of, but I had cognition, I had the ability to drive, I had the ability to carry on conversations.
I don't know the exact number of how much memory you could maintain, but I do know for a fact it was not beyond 5 minutes.
Right.
Because at one point I said, hey, Roger, we need to go to the emergency room. And Roger was like, okay, if you think I need to. I'm like, I do think you need to. So I was going to go out to his shed. I said, go, you need to, because he's just looking down at his feet, doesn't have any shoes and socks on. I said, you need to get your shoes and socks on so we can go. I was going out to the shed in the yard to look up this weed and feed that he'd been putting out, just in case he had inhaled a big giant thing of weed and feed and it had gotten up in his brain and shut things down in case there was a toxicity issue.
Some kind of trigger. Yeah.
So I'm out there literally 3 or 4 minutes. I come back in, Roger's roaming around with socks, just aimlessly room to room with socks. I said, Roger, did you forget the shoes, buddy? We need to put your shoes on. So Roger goes, okay. He was so compliant and so childlike.
By the way, Joy loved that part.
Oh, you've never seen a more compliant Roger.
Now you got to realize, obviously, and not like that, Joy is concerned, and we're able to talk about some things after the fact with some measure of levity, and but she does say, yeah, be very compliant, just very whatever.
Yep.
At one point, she wanted me to sit down, and she wanted to take my blood pressure. Is it okay if I took your blood pressure? okay.
Okay.
So I just sat down and that would, yes, probably not be typical. So anyway,
No.
so she did enjoy that part.
Sure.
Other parts were
Well, I had fun
terrifying.
leading you around by the hand too, trying to get you to the Jeep so we could get you to the hospital. Roger had actually never ridden in the Jeep,
I still haven't.
and he still hasn't. He made a great joke the following day, which was, "So I hear that I rode in your Jeep. Apparently, it was not memorable." Oh, good times. Hey, glad to have you back
Well,
for season 9.
I'm glad to be back and to learn. Gosh, well, part of the reflection or that I've thought about is just how both precious memory is, but how vital it is to any sense of actual existence.
Precious memories, how they linger. There you go. It was good. I don't know the rest.
So, but memory really, aside, you could think of it, oh, it's a convenience, or you have to have it to, but even experience life.
Right.
And really, even to experience the passage of time.
Right.
Because I have read, a friend had sent me a book several years ago about, different medical conditions, but you can have people that literally don't have any memory beyond 10 or 15 seconds. Well, you realize you can't experience time. Time is not so you're existing, but any sense of existence is tied to memory. So just think about one, which is separate from cognition and decision making and some of those kind of things, and just the reflection that's fascinatingly significant as it relates to a sense of existence. But also, just as a part of the reflection is, it's just impossible to see that fitting any kind of evolutionary paradigm or narrative about. In other words, that well, it's not necessarily something you would have to survive necessarily. Think about whether amoeba or different kind of things where they have memory, but to exist and experience and enjoy life, right? It's not conceivable for me that would be something among many things. It'd just be a product of chance.
It's design, and it made me think even more deeply about even why memory is essential to existence. I mean, because it made me think about, do plants remember? It's a living thing. It breathes. Does my dog remember? Yes, there's certain things it's interesting. I'll see my dog remember certain things. Right. He remembers certain commands, certain things. When I bring him a Bucky toy from Bucky's, the giant gas station chain, he loves Bucky. I mean, he gets all he remembers Bucky. He's like, oh yeah, I remember tearing his face off. That was my favorite part. But it made me wonder, part of the difference between human existence and plant existence and animal existence, all living things. One of the incredible things is we have the capacity for what I would call extended memory. In other words, not just remembering certain commands. We can remember events. I can remember events. I can remember all the way back to like 2 years old, literally being potty trained. I remember it. I can remember the whole scene in my mind. This is in Missouri. And I'm like, why does our mind hang on to certain things?
And why potty training? Was this a traumatic event?
Well, no, but I think it was the first time I remember sitting on a commode. And of course, at that age, you're propped up on it, and your legs are just dangling, and you feel like you're going to fall in because you're such a little guy. So there was probably a little trauma.
Fear trigger.
Right?
Yeah,
fear trigger. Yeah. Because I remember gripping the side of that seat, because I've seen these things flush. And
I do not want to disappear.
I don't have all the spatial integrity stuff worked out about how I couldn't actually fit through that. But I'm like, I know I can fit through this seat. And
there's a whirlpool that I don't want to be in.
Exactly. And I just remember, so I was thinking the extraordinary blessing of being able to remember, events from the past, and remembering smells, remembering tastes, remembering moments, all of that. What a blessing that is to existence. And even when I share, with someone who has passed, or they've lost a loved one who's passed, I really encourage now, hey, enjoy the good memories of that person. Now we realize there's going to be a reuniting that takes place later, but in between, we can enjoy those memories. So I had the moment, just a brief moment of, when Roger was going through all this, what if Roger never comes back? And I started processing the loss of that, and it was too much. It was too much for my mind to start. I would probably lapse into depression if I went too far down that road. And so it was like, all right, dude, we're going to stay in the moment. We're going to pray. We're going to get other people praying. And then just, it was very, I remember that for me, it was like a 5-hour window between 7 and midnight, because we left the emergency room around midnight.
Right. Yeah.
And then after that,
I learned later.
After that, frankly, I didn't care, because I was going to sleep.
You were asleep, and we don't remember a lot while we're sleeping.
Nope. But I do remember calling the next morning, and Roger, I'm talking to Roger, and I'm talking to Joy, but Roger's on speaker, and I'm like, oh, he's back. He's completely back. Right. So whatever happened has now unhappened, which is important. But yeah, just there's a certain kind of loss. If Roger dies, that's one kind of loss.
Yes.
But if you're living, but you're not able to interact,
right,
and be the thought leader that I proclaimed you to be last week, I feel like I hexed him just a hair. And then he did 2 face casts in a row on the importance of remembering things. And it's like God just said, hey, watch this.
Well, there's that, and as you bring that up, a fresh way of entering into the ache of people.
Yes.
With Alzheimer's,
dementia, Alzheimer's.
And remember, even our Uncle Walt.
Yep.
And that space he was in at a point where he was starting to enter the fog, and he knew he was.
Yeah.
And that's what's so sobering with like an Alzheimer's, when you realize like you're entering the fog, but because we have no known cure for Alzheimer's, and then he knows it's only going to get worse, and he's not,
right.
That there's, so now the gift I have at one level of looking back at an event, and I can now, and it was so interesting, my mind wanted to go through that. When did I enter when it started to get foggy or dreamlike? And I can remember moments, like you can remember little snippets from a dream. Yeah. I can remember snippets from a certain stretch, and then like from 1 o'clock to like 11.
While you were weeding your garden.
Weeding the garden, doing other kinds of things. No memory, but to be able, I can look back, the grace of being able to look back and see that as a past episode, but to ache for even people I know right now, a friend going through this with his mom, and just the ache of when you're entering that fog. I remember a book I read several years ago, and that was what he called it. What he called Into the Fog. So there's a book, a guy, we knew him growing up. He was Ed Dobson.
Yeah.
He writes this book while he's going into the fog, and he talks about when he had to step down from being a pastor and become a pastor.
Yeah.
And he can no longer, he had to step down just because he was starting to lose various components of memory. So to read a book from someone who knows they're going into the fog, and they're not coming out.
Yeah. And so I remember two things I wanted to talk about on that. One was, I remember our Uncle Chuck also had Alzheimer's. And I remember one time,
that
you were out of town. I mean, I guess you were living up north at that time, but he was living in the Timberridge area where Mom and Dad's, and I remember coming to Mom and Dad's house. This is probably while I was working at Joyful Christian Ministries, and Aunt Mary Lois was very concerned because they had lost him. He was somewhere in the neighborhood. We had lost him, and he was
so literally
we had lost him. No, he was wandering around, and no one knew where he was. He was not in the house anywhere. So I remember walking around down that big hill and then around the circle, just looking for my uncle.
Okay.
Because no one knew where he was. And I just thought, gosh, and your situation just reminded me of the horror of that, because the way that you were walking around was aimlessly.
Right.
And how are you feeling? I don't know. I asked you, do you remember doing the podcast with me last week? And you said, no. Like I was the crazy one. He's looking at me like, you're the crazy one. And I said, what's the last thing you remember? And this was interesting. This is what was scary. You said, I don't know. So while you have cognition,
right,
present, and you have a certain amount of long-term memory, idea you can recognize faces, you didn't have the ability to turn on that recollection, whatever thing we turn on to recall. Now, here's the other thing that was amazing that I started thinking.
Yeah.
How much does planning ahead? So remembering is thinking behind. Planning is thinking ahead.
Right.
You had planned certain things ahead that stirred your memory, even in that 10-hour space, because something in your brain remembered that the day before you had bought weed and feed at Home Depot.
Yeah.
And so you went through with that plan. It's just fascinating to me. While you didn't have this short-term memory, planning ahead did something for your brain that allowed you to remember at some level, I've got weed and feed. I got that for a reason.
Well,
I'm going to use that.
Also, I mean, just, again, I almost feel like apologizing for all the musings about memory, but
musings. I see what you did there.
But there's this very interesting, even little parts of memory, because so in order to spread the weed and feed, which I don't recall doing, and Joy just told me she realized that she was in the backyard painting a fence section, but realized that I had done that because she could see that it spread around. Well, I didn't pour it all in one place. I spread it in different places.
Right.
So it wasn't. So there was some level of memory.
It was one thing if there was a mound of weed and feed in one corner.
I just keep spreading it in one place. No, but I would say, there's still, there's some kind of micro memory, and even in that deep fog. So in the deepest part, the epicenter of that non-memory, where I couldn't recall past events. Well, they were still there.
Yeah.
But there was another kind of fuzziness that had gotten mixed in there of just a lot of I don't knows. I just can't seem to.
Right. I can't recall.
I can't bring it up. But it's actually there.
Whatever that thing is, it's in a file cabinet in your brain, but your ability to open the drawer just isn't there.
Right. But I don't know now.
It's all there, though.
If those 10 hours, that particular 10 hours, 1 to 11 Sunday.
If you'll ever remember them.
I don't know if that's in the file cabinet.
Yeah.
That's what but when I was in the epicenter of that, I couldn't pull out things from other files.
Right.
Which I now clearly can,
Right.
I know we did a podcast last week.
Who am I?
Well, and I think there's even a thing as it relates to people that's something that's beyond just memory. There's, I think, again, there are these other, which all actually, it just reminds me, again, of this wonderful, beautiful Bible description. We're fearfully and wonderfully made.
Yeah.
And I got a glimpse into a part of the wonder of who we are that we take for granted.
Oh, yeah.
You just don't think, but to realize memory is related to having relationship, sense of time, sense of existence, sense of joy, certain survival things. Yeah. Remembering that that a thing is dangerous or
but there's also, there's a difference between conscious and unconscious, because you were unconscious and yet
at some level, yes.
and yet conscious.
Right.
Which I'm like, that's a whole new thing. Because when we think of unconscious, in other words, we can't, we're asleep, we've been knocked out, something like that.
Right.
That's what but I'm like, no, he was unconscious, but he's conscious. His eyes are operating.
Kind of sleepwalking.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly what it is.
It reminded
the sleepwalker doesn't remember.
Right. One of our kids had a battle with that for a little bit, and that's what Joy would say. It reminded.
It's kind of that's a small microcosm of transient global amnesia.
Yeah.
You're walking around the house, but you have no memory of it. And you can talk to people. I remember Jessica Dobson, you'll love this. I remember we were staying at Mark and Winnie's house one time, and it's like 2:00 in the morning, and we're sleeping, and all of a sudden I realized, sometimes you're asleep and you wake up because you feel like there's a presence.
Someone in your room.
Like there's a presence near you. And I remember having that feeling. I sit up, and Jessica's just sitting right there, standing right there by the bed. And she goes, "Uncle Bruce, would you like a Coke?" And her eyes are woo, woo, woo. And I'm like, no, I'm good.
It's like, how do you? Because I don't want to. what do you do there?
You wake them up, shake up. That's the thing to do. No, it was just like,
here's some cold water.
I was like, go away.
This is not comfortable.
Go back to wherever you were in Coke world.
But you're coming out of sleep, so you're actually trying to acclimate as well to what's going on.
I'm very disoriented.
This is right.
I'm just
both of you have some level of disorientation.
I was only partially conscious at that moment, but it was just that's it. The amazingness of what I go back to: we are created, we are designed, and it's beyond our comprehension. It even DNA strands and how that affect. I was just thinking, because I've got this thing, Horner syndrome, where my eyeball stays constricted and all that.
Related to your shingles?
I think it's related to shingles.
Yeah,
I think it was shingles was on this side, and then I had cluster headaches for 10 days that were just the most brutal thing.
Yeah.
But I've read some stuff in medical journals where they've had people that had post ophthalmology. The third nerve gets triggered by the headache, but it injures the nerve. The headache is so severe it injures the nerve. Oh. And so that's why, in my mind, that's why this hasn't resolved. It's like I still have shingles that, by the way, when you're going through your thing, my shingles were shingling. I was having constant, because I was under stress. I was having constant pain right here, more than just ants crawling, which I'll get every now and then. It was like a painful rash.
Okay.
Because stress will do that. So sorry. But from what I've read, when that third nerve gets triggered by a cluster headache, it's possible that it may never resolve. Because the nerve itself was injured. Now, I also know from my experience with cutting my finger off,
not intentionally,
but nerves can heal, because when they sewed this side of my finger back on for 5 years, I didn't have any. I would touch it and I would feel nothing.
Right.
Just couldn't feel anything.
Right.
This is the wonder of God's creation, the way the body heals over time. I mean, it's not an immediate healing, but over 5 years, Roger, I have complete feeling on that piece of skin that was literally dead.
I don't think I've ever heard you say that.
It was detached.
Yeah.
Well, I talk about this in the scars of suffering and why it's important that you're going to get your feelings back. You're going to go through a long season of dark.
Good. Yeah.
And you don't want to feel. And you really want to stay numb. And there's even when a body goes into shock, I'll be learning about this weekend at wilderness medicine training, wilderness first aid. When a body goes into shock, it can't feel the pain because the pain would be too intense. God made it where the person can function at a certain level.
Okay.
And then when shock wears off, they realize, oh, I've got a bone protrusion coming out of my hip. It's a femur break or whatever it is. And then the pain, is but it just the way that God's created the body and the body heals over time. It's such an encouraging thing to me that there is nothing that we've ever experienced that God cannot heal over time. Emotional things, physical things that so I even thought about there's a chance that my body, with God's help, will heal this third nerve that's been triggered. The good news is it doesn't affect anything. It doesn't affect my eyesight. I thought because it's constantly constricted, in other words, it won't dilate. So like in a dark room, this eye will dilate. It'll get big to let as much light in as possible. This one stays the same.
Really?
Yeah. So it never dilates. So if it's really dark, my mind knows to use this eye to see.
Yes.
Because it's like, oh, this one's letting light in. This one, for some reason, is not letting light in. So we're gonna all that's just amazing.
It is.
The way that God did all that. Right. And I learned this years ago because I have two different kinds of contacts. I have a short distance contact in this eye and a long distance contact in this eye. The fact that my brain knows which one to use, like right now as I'm looking at the screen, this eye is seeing it. Because it's fuzzy with this eye. It's too close. But if I'm looking at that clock, oh yeah, this eye can't see it. But this eye can see it with perfect.
Okay.
Isn't that amazing?
And your brain just gets.
And my optometrist helped me understand that because I was like, "There's no way I can wear two different contacts. That'd be like double vision." Right. She goes, "No, you don't." She goes, "Your eyes don't actually see." She said, "Your brain sees. The eye is just a receptacle for the light, and then your brain sees and interprets, and it knows which eye." So even for some people that have eyes that are of different power, like both of my eyes are pretty much the same in terms of, like, if I have glasses, it's minus 875 on both sides.
Right.
But some people might have one that's minus 875 and then one that's 4. Well, their brain over time learned, I see long distance through this eye, I see short distance through this eye. And I'm like, well, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Just never. But anyway, glory to God. It's the human body.
Yeah.
And the brain.
Right.
Are amazing.
No, right. It just.
So enough talk about you. That was my segue. Did you like that?
Yeah,
so
let's forget about
it. Speaking of frightening, speaking of frightening things, the scary things, terrifying things. So I was reading yesterday with the whole war in Ukraine and Russia invading Ukraine, and now I mean full tilt invasion and bombing cities and all of this. I realized a couple of things. Number one, our generation, it feels different than the war in Iraq and all of that and the war in Afghanistan, but I feel like our generation is perhaps feeling what people felt in 1941.
Surely.
In America, this is happening way over there.
Right.
But Germany is now invading Poland.
Right.
Just taking over. And there's so much rhetoric around, well, he's not going to continue doing that and appeasement and all of this, but then he kept, we're going to take another country, and we're going to take another country, and we're going to take another. And it reminded me of Jesus and why this whole thing, while it's troubling, it doesn't scare me. So I was reading, and I went to make sure I was getting this right. I read Luke 21 yesterday, and I need to just do a quick blog post about this. It's so good because Jesus said, now, when you hear of wars and rumors of wars and unrest, it's translated disturbances, revolutions.
Well, even if I think about rumors of wars, where now that can be, if he's done it, this country,
who's next?
Right. Who's next? So yeah, that is,
or who else might be emboldened? I'm not a political analyst or anything like that, but who else would China be emboldened to try to take a country? Would North Korea be emboldened?
But here's the thing, right? Because once we know copycat things again,
exactly.
the whole kind of thing, you look and see, you see the world response, you see how, could it be a catalyst? We're not trying to terrify everybody.
No, because this is the beautiful thing. Jesus says, when you hear of this, he said, don't be frightened. Literally, don't be frightened. And I'm like, that's where Jesus wants us to live. Don't be frightened. He said, these things must happen. He said, but the end won't come for a long time. So it's like from now, because he even talked about the destruction of Jerusalem in that passage.
Mm-hmm.
From now, your generation is going to see this.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, when you see this, he said, flee to the hills. If you're in Judea, flee to the hills. And it reminded me, that's exactly what's happening in Ukraine. I think it's like up to 2 million people have now fled.
It's a stunning number and at a stunning speed. But I was reading that.
How do you even get 2 million people out of the country that quick?
Right. It's unprecedented. Even I saw a comparison like with Syria, the war in Syria, 2011, and the first million people that exited the country, it was like 3 months. Okay. It took 3 months, a week and a half, a million people had been able to flee Ukraine in a week and a half. Anyway, it's staggering in terms of, well, so many things.
And here's the reason I say it shouldn't be frightening to us because Jesus said this was going to happen. It would be one thing if Jesus said, hey, it's just, the world's going to get better and better and it's going to be great. And once you start following me, you don't have to worry about all the. No, I'm thinking about Ukrainian believers, followers of Jesus, Latvian followers of Jesus.
Yes.
Anyone in proximity to Russia, including Poland, Alaska, who's 54 miles away from Russia. Jesus says, don't be frightened. Don't be frightened. These things are going to happen, but the end doesn't come yet. And Jesus would always talk about persevering through the until the end. And I'm like, he doesn't want us to be afraid, but he does want us to persevere. And it's just this beautiful thing of we don't need to be alarmed. We need to be praying. We should certainly be concerned for the people of Russia, the people of Ukraine, because there's so many Russian people now. Was it 1,300 demonstrators that were arrested that were protesting they're not for. I mean, some are obviously, but some are not for that. And I just realized the unrest. But Jesus promised it. Jesus told us long before it happened. This is going to keep happening. World War I happened, and people might have thought That could never happen again.
No, it was. And it wasn't that the war to end all wars.
The war to end all wars, and just 20-something years later,
happened again.
It happened again.
And we could have believed after 1945, we learned the lesson. It's not. You're not going to have anyone pull a Hitler again. You're just not going to. Everyone can see.
That
not healthy.
That's
not
well.
right. That doesn't.
But for years, I also realized, for countries that were exercising power, it went very well for them.
Right.
Jesus lived in the age of Roman occupation. They had invaded the land of Israel and taken it over.
Yeah.
And they were powerful. I mean, it was civilian casualties meant nothing to them.
Exactly.
It's we're coming in, it's scorched earth. And Jesus in that setting says, don't be frightened. Don't be frightened. This must happen. This is going to happen. In fact, it's going to happen right here in Jerusalem. And it was in that passage he said, because the disciples were like, man, look at this temple. Isn't this amazing? And I think they were thinking, glory to God. This is an extraordinary. And Jesus is like, yeah, I hate to tell you this, but the time's coming pretty soon. We're not one stone, not one of these golden overlaid stones will be even on top of each other. They will come to such destruction. It will be literally leveled.
Yeah. Think though, I'm thinking then.
But don't be afraid. I love that.
The message behind the message. When you have Jesus talking about micro, okay, a few years from now, this is going to be this, or even looking centuries down, well, you realize the story behind the story is there's a deeper story. And there's someone who can see the whole story, who's bigger.
Who can see the whole story.
There's somebody bigger than, and so Jesus is, it was what even what I thought about when that interesting little conversation Jesus has with Peter, and he starts telling Peter how he's going to die. Now there's going to be a day when, and then Peter points to John and says, well, what about him? And Jesus says,
that's not your story.
Right. Well, he says, what if I decide for him to live X amount, what is that to you? But I'm thinking the whole thing is this is one of those of many places where he just acted like God. I'm not talking about, he didn't have to say he was God.
Right.
Oh, I'm deciding that.
Yeah.
And what Jesus is saying,
yes,
Putin's not the end of the story. Biden's not the end of the story. Germany, none of those are mastering the story.
No.
However, we may be the biggest economy in the world. We might think we have the biggest military. God laughs. I mean, that because it's a bigger story.
And God knows the whole story. So
he knows the whole story.
Back, one of my favorite passages in Scripture, Daniel chapter 3, where you have the Babylonian Empire, which is the greatest empire of all times. I mean, of all human history at that point.
Right.
And it's like, this is going to be the golden age that never ends. And yet in the middle of that empire, God gives Daniel a dream. Well, he actually gives Nebuchadnezzar a dream that Daniel interprets and said, yeah, your kingdom's not going to remain.
Right.
And after you, another kingdom's coming, and after you, another kingdom's coming. And then this fourth kingdom's going to come, and it's going to be scorched earth, which I believe was the Roman Empire. And in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will himself set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will be handed over to another people. Friends, we are part of the kingdom of heaven that can never be destroyed. Jesus established it with his death, this whole new covenant in his blood. That's why I said, don't be afraid. It was another passage where he said, yeah, you're going to be thrown in prison and you're going to be flogged in the synagogues and some of you are going to get killed and people will actually think they're doing a service to God. He said, but don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid. Don't worry. He's constantly saying, we're a part of this kingdom. That's the good news of the kingdom. No matter what happens, if Russia decided to invade Alaska, the United States and Canada and or China, don't be afraid.
Right.
God, nothing can separate us from the love of God. Nothing can separate us from the kingdom of God, which is eternal, that will never come to an end. Every other kingdom, including the United States of America, will come to an end. And we don't need to fear that. So again, don't hear what I'm not saying. It's not that we shouldn't be praying, that we shouldn't be concerned for the people of Ukraine and Russia and all of, and I realize this is how war in one place does begin to, there's a trickle effect worldwide now, more so than because there's such a global connection to everything. So even sanctions that the United States is going to place on Russia and Russian business and no oil now, all of that. But then we have gas prices going up, and I'm like, all right, we're not getting bombed.
Right.
To me, gas prices, who cares? If we're doing the right thing to try to shut that down,
right.
I'll pay the $10 a gallon for gas. Marlene and I are actually thinking about getting some bikes too. We're thinking that might be a good idea for getting around.
I'll say this, if I'm circling back to our opening story, or
are you saying that I was rambling?
No. What hit me though is, and it may be helpful for people to hear, because I think it personalizes things outside of, okay, you got macro, which is a war, which is a macro kind of event.
Yes.
Has these impacts on us.
Right.
But I realized, Bruce, coming out of the incident I had this weekend, I realized even the vulnerability of life, and what Joy had to deal with the possibility is I don't come out of that.
Right.
I go into that fog,
yep.
and I never come out. And you have and we talked about stories, family members we've had that went into the fog and they didn't come out. But one of the things, even now, even coming into the day, I'm still processing. I'm realizing how fragile life is, and realizing that could happen again. And you could think through.
There's a 3 to 24% chance that could happen again to you.
But here's coming. It's not the whole story.
No.
Even if I didn't come back, my story is not over. The larger story is not over. My wife's story is not over. Because there's a bigger story behind our story.
Well, and you even shared in your face cast this morning, I think, or yesterday, but you talked about the value of a sparrow. How do you determine the value of a life? That was another passage. I'm alluding to another place than you were, but Jesus says, but don't be afraid. You are more valuable than many sparrows. Right. It was this whole thing. Don't be afraid. He was saying, in essence, in the context, look, understand this. Your heavenly Father knows when a sparrow dies.
Right.
He's aware. We can't even imagine that.
Right.
He's aware of that. I remember one time we had a bird hit our window and then fell and it died. And I just felt terrible about it. I mean, I just felt awful about why did I have to put that huge glass door in? Because I felt responsible.
Windows are a bird killer.
They are. But then to reflect on the fact that God knows that bird hit the window and died. And then Jesus is making this thing. Don't be afraid. You're so much more valuable than even many sparrows. Your heavenly Father knows you're coming and you're going. It's comforting to me that God knows the story of my death.
Right.
In the same way that the story of my life was not a surprise to him. Oh, gosh, February 5th, 1964, around 2:00 Bruce just showed up. We did not see that coming. I had no idea. It's comforting to me that he knows the story of my death as well.
Because I don't want to know the story of my death.
Well, and then of course I'm thinking about, and we've talked about this before, but the amazing why Jesus could say, "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid, don't look into the future with fear." He knew the story of his death.
Yeah.
And didn't live in dread.
Right.
And I'm like, in fact, what I was reading this morning in Luke chapter 9, he just said, guys, understand this. You're going to have to carry a cross every day. Every day. He said, because if you try to save your life, you're going to lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake and the sake of the gospel of the kingdom, you'll find it. And I'm like, what? Jesus gives us the most beautiful, wonderful, easy way to live. Think about what causes anxieties and worries and fears. I'm talking about mine.
Right.
It's usually hanging on to something, clinging to something. I don't want this to happen. I don't want to lose that. Because I've even thought this is how selfish I am. I've thought, all right, so we got a war in Russia, in Ukraine, and now people may decide not to travel, or travel may become harder to do. And gosh, how's that going to affect my hikes? Because not very many people have signed up this year. It's an interesting thing.
Or conferences,
or gas prices.
Right.
So flying places. And I'm like, but don't worry. I was praying this morning, the disciples' prayer. God, Father, give us this day daily bread. What we need this day. What a wonderful way to live. Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow. I'm like, I want everyone to know that peace. I want everyone to know the love of God, the love of Christ that says we don't have to worry about any of those things. And again, it's not that we're callous about the pain and suffering. Joy and sorrow will be mixed throughout our life until the new order.
He's calling us to live in light of the bigger story.
Yes.
The invitation of Jesus is the call.
You said that so much better than I did.
To enter into the larger story.
The larger story.
Which
God knows.
Right. This doesn't make this story insignificant.
No.
This is a core part, but it's part of a larger. It's where you realize the chapter of a book is part of a book.
It's the setting. When I read about a movie, it'll say this is a movie set in 1964 or whatever it is. So that's the setting, but it's giving you a smaller story, usually a story of a person.
Yeah.
Within the larger setting of World War or whatever is going on. But this beautiful thing to remind, and you do a great way of saying it, reminding our listeners, we're part of a bigger story.
Bigger story.
And the bigger story is the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God that will never end.
Yeah.
Nothing, Romans chapter 8, nothing can separate us from the love of God. Not sword, not war, not death, not angels or demons. I mean, that's just a powerful statement.
Right.
Not even an angel can cut me out of the kingdom.
Right.
An angel might actually think, from watching my life, I don't think he needs to be
against
right.
me.
He does not need to be in the kingdom. I've thought of myself, but I'm like, I could just mess everything up, frankly. But nothing can separate me from God's love. And that is what allows us to live without fear. And I know in our humanity, we'll feel those moments of fear but we can have this peace no matter what's happening worldwide, no matter what's happening in the United States, no matter politically or pandemically or otherwise.
Or personally.
For me to look back. That's good.
There's frightening. What I went through, I can look back.
Frightening.
Right. And realize that can happen again. All the kind of. But there is a piece of, living in light of the bigger story, which takes the micro story into seriously, taking precautions, all the kinds of things. It's just, live in light of the bigger story. So, in the words of Jesus, never fear, be of good cheer.
There is greater glory in the larger story.
Ooh, I like that too. Our listeners can decide which closing word, Rogers
I can't even
or Bruce.
remember Rogers' closing word. It was so trivial.
That was Rich.
I don't recall.
It's going to be a lot of don't remember.
Until next week.
If we remember.
If we remember, we'll see you then for season 10.